Hi everyone, how's it going? I'm Bonnie Violet, trans femme, genderqueer, spiritual drag artist, digital chaplain.
I'm Pacey, trans mask, non-binary, recovery and mental health advocate.
And welcome to Transjoyboise, where every story, laugh, and act of joy is a stand for our community.
We uplift bold voices, share real experiences, and celebrate trans lives thriving.
Tune in, connect, and spread the joy because trans joy is unstoppable.
We nailed it that time.
Yes, we did. I don't know what to do with my eyes though. Now that we have a monitor, so we're gonna try to cheat. I'm just like, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
So bear with us, folks.
Yeah. And I'm stoked that we have Nikson with us again. So
yeah, I'm so happy to be here. I'm Nikson. I'm the chair of the Idaho. Brain just went blank for a second. So I'm the chair of the Idaho Democratic Queer Caucus, where we do a lot of political organizing and work. We do community advocacy outside of that. And so, yeah, I spend a lot of time in the Capitol building during the session, working with others on legislation that's passed.
Awesome.
That seems really stressful. And so uncomfortable, just like with the experience that you had in DC, just like in any government settings right now, it just seems like it would be I would feel really stressed out all the time.
Yeah, I really have a lot of respect for you. I mean, I did before, but after going to this is so weird. After going to DC, I was reminded why I didn't go do any of the hearings or do any of the things here, because I just don't think I'm built for that. At this point in time in my transition, it brought up some really difficult things that it almost felt like it took me backwards in feeling safe and comfortable and in my body and in the world. And so it took me a little while to really, I think, recover.
Yeah.
How has it impacted you?
Yeah. And, first I just want to say political advocacy work is not for everybody, and that's okay, because it is really hard. It is uncomfortable. It is stressful. It's frustrating beyond belief. And it's so maddening because it is really harmful. And so, there's all sorts of different types of advocacy work that people can involved in. And it doesn't have to be specifically, work at the Statehouse. And yeah, I will say this session was the worst I've seen it be, especially for our community. And other marginalized communities, and just generally for the state of Idaho. It was a pretty horrific session. And it was really stressful. I was exhausted and scared, quite frankly, of seeing the type of legislation that was coming out, and just disgusted hearing, you were there during one of the worst, it was 270, right? Yeah, it was criminalizing, first bill to criminalize trans folks in the state of Idaho that passed. And just hearing legislators say truly horrific things about our community. So,
yeah. Well, one, I guess, positive thing was you made history since the last time we talked with you. So you became the first transgender person to be sworn in into the House of Representatives as a... So talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so
I don't want to say the wrong words.
No, you're good.
I know what you did. I just don't know how to talk about it.
Yeah, so I was sworn into the Senate. I was the first openly trans person sworn in as a state senator in the state of Idaho. Now, I do want to note, I was there to sub for one of the legislators, Senator Robbie, and it was for a week. It wasn't for an extended period of time. And part of the reason I was a sub is because I'd run for office. I really knew the district. I had knocked on thousands of doors, talked to so many people. I understand how legislation works, the legislative session works. And then I knew legislators too. So the reason I went into that role and subbing is because, I had a good understanding background, and I had talked to the people in district. So I was a choice for that reason, but it is meaningful.
Right. Well, and it's a pretty common thing that happens,
yes.
Right? During any session, a lot of the senators or representatives will have folks who kind of just sit in for them for like a few days or that sort of thing.
Yeah, yep, it is pretty common, but you have to kind of go through a process to make that work. And it was an interesting experience, like very insightful. I've spent a lot of time on the other side, testifying and whatnot. I was hoping actually we would see some of the anti-LGBTQ legislation come through while I was there.
I was too.
And it didn't during the time that I was there. So what I spent my time doing is getting to know the other senators and having conversations and putting hopefully a face to our community.
How was that? Like, did you pee the whole week? Or
I literally went to the bathroom one time and because I knew the facilities bill was going through. And I immediately felt just like extreme anxiety being in that bathroom.
Yeah.
And so I just remained dehydrated for the rest of the week to avoid. And it's one of those things where like I hold a lot of privilege. I'm a passing trans person, but I'm an out trans person, and I knew people in that building knew who I was. And knowing that the facilities bill was going through, I think my anxiety spiked. And I know that's the reality for like bathrooms is a terrifying place for trans folks. For that reason, for so many reasons.
And at the national level, we've seen over and over about like, representatives or like not being able to have access to the restrooms or being trans. I know when I was there in DC, that was like one of my biggest stressors was like which bathroom I could use. And like the one side, I think the House side was a lot more concerning, whereas the Senate side, but either way, like I was like trying to just find like single use so that it didn't have to be a thing, which so I think in Idaho it feels the same way, right?
Yeah.
Did you have to sit next to Shippy?
I did. I sat next to Shippy the entire week, and it was interesting. He invited me into his office to have a conversation, get to know each other, which I was a little nervous about, but it was fine. Sat next to him all week, and it was very it was nice. Like I said, good morning. We didn't do a lot of talking,
right?
But it was like it was such a wild experience to sit next to this person, have conversations. We're talking about what we do for a living. We're talking about family, things like that. And then literally, I think it was the next week or the week after, testifying and at the 270, the indecent exposure bill, and having Shippy say that he doesn't support the bill, voting against what the Republicans are voting in favor of this bill, because he feels that it actually affirms the existence of trans people, which is a truly disgusting take.
Yeah. It's like in some ways it makes sense to the logic that people act as if we don't exist. However, it's pretty gross, especially where like he invited you and you talked and like he obviously met a trans person.
Yeah.
That would be really, really hard. One thing I learned just in my short time of like going to the hearings and things like that is how much it's just like shaking hands across the aisle, and it feels so disingenuous and so gross because you can have a conversation with someone like I had a conversation with Heather Scott at the HIV decriminalization event, and she seemed really like a really educated, informed, rational person when it was this one issue. But then when she is surrounded by her peers, she just turns that off, and just this bigot comes out. And
decorum is a really big thing there. Like they say decorum, and what they mean by decorum is like be respectful, be nice, all of that. We have differences, things like that. But then there's like how saying some of the things that they say when it comes to committee or when it comes to debating on the floor is still considered decorum. I just don't understand that. I don't like, they even like when I went up and testified, the chairman even was like Senator Mathews, and then proceeded to
talk that way,
and vote in favor of a bill that harms our community.
I was so ignorant, naive when I was like, because when I was a senior in high school, I I got to be a page in the House of Representatives.
Oh, wow.
A Democratic page, you know, so I was a minority, but there was like, I would say it was one of the most like one of the best work, like it felt like one of the best working environments in the sense that it just felt like we all were there, like coming together to do this thing. And obviously there was a lot more going on than what I was aware of at the time. But I remember just thinking like, oh, this is such a pleasant experience. I could see myself doing this every day. This is great. And then like to think of it now, I'm like, oh, such delusion. Like delusion.
Yeah. Absolute delusion.
And it just feels really inauthentic. It lacks integrity. Like I can understand being kind. I don't know. I can understand being kind, but just to think of it now, it just feels like there was so much missing. Representative Mike Simpson was like the Speaker of the House, I believe. And like I engaged with him all the time. Yeah. You know, and now like, going to Mike Simpson's office. Well, no, I didn't do that. And yeah, I think that was the one office we didn't get to meet with him.
Got it.
I just couldn't, and he would not have like talked to me the way that he used to back in the day. Not at all.
Well, and that's the thing is like politics have always been terrible. I'm not going to say that politics have been like this bright shining thing in our history because it hasn't.
But I think like the American dream and the perception of what America is, like it's all getting disillusioned. So I think there was this idea of
well, and
like how democracy, I think you've talked about it before, how you used to be like such a fan of democracy and like all this sort of stuff. And then like as you start to look a little closer, it's like gross.
Well, it used to be boring, and I would love boring again. Like I remember like, and again, it's never been great for especially marginalized communities. There's always been problems because there's systemic issues with our political system, right?
It's always been shitty,
right?
We've just been,
but now it's being taken over.
Blind.
It's more vocally, and let me say that it's being taken more openly by like a Christian nationalist movement that is trying to push their ideology. These bills are not popular bills. No. There's so much data that says, hey, people don't actually care about this legislation. They want you to focus on the issues that are going to make the day-to-day lives better. And yet they still focus so much time and energy on this legislation. There were 25 plus probably pieces of legislation introduced just targeting the LGBTQ
and
community.
How many of those were like kind of specifically trans and non-binary?
Most of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think that's something that I often, and I love my LGBTQ community. I think it's important for us to have the solidarity, but also I think it's really important to highlight or spotlight that a majority of those were against trans and non-binary people, not our cis, you know, counterparts, if you will. I think that's important for us to see, and I think it's important for the rest of our community to see as well too.
Absolutely.
Like even like I love that there's the pride flag is up at City Hall, but there's a part of me is like, why not the trans flag? I know a lot of the legislation was specifically around like the rainbow flag, so I get that. But I think with everything that's been happening with trans folks, it would be lovely to see. And I know like they have the progress flag, right? So it does include like trans, non-binary, black and brown. Does it have the new with the inclusion of non-binary as well?
I believe it
with
is
the yellow triangle with a purple circle in the middle.
I thought so. I'd have to look again, but I think so.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to look a little closer too.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
That whole thing, the whole thing with the flags.
Well, and it's
sex flags.
I know, right?
Whispers. Sex flags.
But it is one of those things that's interesting to me how like it seems fairly like minor. I think even like before the bathroom situation, as some like it's felt like it's a bathrooms, who cares? But like after living into it, it's a big deal. And so I think even just these flags on or not on a flagpole at City Hall or other places really is quite powerful. I think especially at the face of thinking that it can't happen anymore. You know, I think I took for granted the fact of just showing something like that. But I think now that it's kind of under attack, if you will, it does feel a little bit more. I feel like I was a little detached from the impact of the issue, if you will.
You can see a very clear and distinct like separation going on right now when it comes to like organizations, businesses, just because there are going to be people that adhere to the executive orders that are being issued, and there are going to be people that are going to stand up against them. So like people that are still going to be flying their flags, people that are still going to, you know, not police their restrooms. And then with other things that are happening, like, God, there's another bill. There's so many right now. And I think that like with the banks, with that executive order, with getting rid of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, I think we're going to see, even when it comes to our banks, like people that are going to align with the more conservative ideologies, and people that are like, no, we're still a safe place for women. We're still a safe place for, you know, trans people. And that's such a scary place to be in as a country right now.
And Nikson, from your perspective, do you think you see, because I feel like with so much of this like polarization, do you see more people that are kind of in that neutral in between space, say picking a side and being more vocal about it? Or do you see less people kind of taking a stand and kind of, you know, where we're getting more neutral people versus a larger group on either side? What's your perception or read on that?
I mean, like, we're definitely seeing more people being activated right now, because like what is happening both from a national and a local standpoint is really extreme. And it is having, and it, you know, it's like challenging people's like mindset about, okay, what do you believe in democracy? What do you believe to be right? What do you want your life or the life of your family members or your neighbors to be like, and what are you comfortable with? So I think it's like really making people kind of face like that and pick a side. And then there's the aspect that it is actually materially impacting, you know, some of these executive orders. We know an executive order on the face of it does not have the power to make but it is giving direction to the people in his cabinet, to organizations. And so either they will take action that will have an impact, or it introduces a chilling effect where organizations, you know, the executive order specifically around trans women playing sports, that executive order was put out, and then the NCAA decided that they would actually roll back their rules around trans women participating in sports. That was a response to the executive order.
Even Gavin Newsom kind of.
That's
a whole nother conversation.
That's a whole. But actually, like, it plays into all of this. You know, one of the things that I've really been pushing in all the conversations that I've had, especially when we talk about our Democratic leaders, our Democratic elected officials, our allies, is at some point activism has to move beyond the marriage memorial that was not adopted and pride flags. And we have to be able, and we need them to be able to speak very strongly about all of these attacks, most specifically on trans people that are truly harmful and horrific on many, many levels. And, you know, I do appreciate Mayor McLean keeping the flag up because I think it's less, I mean, it's about the flag, right? But I think it's actually less about the flag, and it's more seeing a leader saying,
taking a stand
and
calling their bluff, really.
Yes.
What's going to happen?
Yes.
Nothing can happen with that law right now, right? Is my understanding.
No, there is no enforcement. Yes. And next year it will. Right. Next year, absolutely, they're going to come back. They've already said it. They will come back, and they will.
With a little more teeth in it.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, personally, I say bring it on. Because I'd rather see a leader stand up and say, nope, not going to do this, than us just letting things slowly get, and it wouldn't even be slow. I had this conversation with somebody the other day. They were concerned, well, McLean having the flag up is going to make things worse next year. And my response was, things will be worse next year.
Totally. And it's like, we got to stop cowering down, and we have to fight where we can fight. And this is a fight that can be fought with fairly low collateral damage, if you will. Whereas like, we're going to talk a little bit more where like the indecent exposure law that was passed, like, I don't know that that's something to fuck with, you know, but,
Right.
or not just for anyone to fuck with,
Right.
Because there's so much more collateral, or there's just so more collateral damage or
Right.
damage that could happen to the individual.
Yes.
Specifically,
Yes.
in that arrangement. So I think we have to take our fights where we can,
Right.
and then be smart where,
Right.
which sucks.
Well, and again, this is where,
Mhm.
this is where we need our leaders
Mhm.
and our allies who are not going to be harmed in a bill like the indecent exposure bill to show up and fight against that. And that's a difference here. There's a lot of the bills that pass, and we get into this, they had private cause of action, meaning that an individual could sue. So like the facilities bill, there isn't an enforcement against the individual, like a trans person in a bathroom that aligns with their gender identity. It allows an individual who is like, there's a trans person in the bathroom with me, to sue the entity.
Right.
The indecent exposure bill has criminal charges against us and our
As an individual.
Yeah.
And like, it's already in effect.
Yes.
Like as of today, it's already in effect.
Yes.
Whereas the facility bill is a little bit further down the line.
July 1st.
So can you clarify a little bit about what the indecent exposure bill is, and just kind of the practicality of how that plays out in a trans or non-binary like day-to-day life?
Absolutely. I want to know a couple things too. One thing that we're seeing that is just, I think, telling and important is that, so what, like normally a bill, if it is passed and signed by the governor, it would go into effect January 1st.
Okay.
So now what we've started to see more and more of, and this is the first year I think I personally have seen this, is they'll put an emergency clause in the bill. And so last year they would put emergency clauses in the bill to make it go into effect on July 1st.
Right. They did it by June 1st because they want to impact
prides, right. Year. So this year we saw several bills that had an emergency clause that says it will go into effect the day the governor signs it. And that is like, this is kind of this is an increase like of pressure and harm that we have been just seeing. So that going back to like this idea of, well, it'll make next year hard. We're already seeing things get worse and worse. So, but in regards to HB 270, the other thing that I would just say, everything that's happening globally, nationally, locally is horrific. It is harmful. It is dangerous. It is terrible. And it is for every valid reason people can feel afraid, right?
Totally. Yeah.
But it is so important that accurate information is getting out there.
Agreed.
because it's already terrible. If we are also like amplifying that fear and that harm by misinformation, because we're not doing our research and really understanding the impact of these bills, then we increase harm that way. Right.
Yeah. My partner
Yeah.
actually commented on, because it's a trend right now on social media that these content creators are talking about HB270 in Idaho, but they don't really know the details of it. So the reel that my partner commented on, this person was saying that the woman at Canyon County Pride was arrested, like that she was topless.
Oh my goodness.
She was arrested. And now if you're like a trans man and you go out topless, you can be arrested and have to register as a sex offender for the rest of your life. And my partner got in the comments because my partner testified in that hearing and was like, actually, this is really incorrect. And everyone just dogpiled on them and was like, you just don't know what you're fucking talking about. And but you see that with social media, they're like, well, this is the person we like. And I don't know. So I just kind of wanted to highlight some of the misinformation.
Yes.
And now,
because there was
hear
some
like the
truth.
Actualities.
There was some truth in that. Can you maybe that's a good example for you to suss out?
That's that I didn't see the part about the rest. I saw a video that said for trans men, because this bill is now in effect, and you've had top surgery, you will be put on the sex offender registry.
Wow.
That is not actual. That's not true. So what this bill does, it's a horrific bill. What it did is it expanded the language of an existing indecent exposure law. So the original exposure law was about genitals specifically.
Mm.
So if you exposed your genitals, you could be charged.
Which is already illegal.
Right.
Mhm.
And because
Yeah.
of this, yep. So what they, so what
Sorry, I
they
didn't
chose
know
to
people
do,
knew.
Yeah. Oh, no,
uh, is they added, like, the most simplest way that I've like said it is they've added chest, breasts, and prosthetics that
Mm.
mimic or look like breasts or genitals.
Mhm.
So we know very specifically from the language. I'm not going to use some of the specific language because it's really transphobic and horrific language, but the language in it, like, very clearly is targeting trans women.
Mhm.
And then because of the passage of HB 421 last year, which was the sex and gender bill, which makes sex and gender the same thing, and there's two sexes, no longer are trans men seen as men. So we are seen as women. And so because the bill specifically calls out women, trans women, and some of these other things, it would also impact trans men who went out.
Who oftentimes seem to not be the main target in a lot of these, which I think
Right.
is I think that's why a lot of people are jumping on this, because I think it's an opportunity to really clearly talk
Right.
about how trans men are also impacted by
Right.
this, because you hear all the rhetoric, you hear all the conversations, because it's such a, toxic masculinity kind of like thing. It's always about the man who's being a woman, or
Right.
acting like a woman, not the
Right.
other way around
Right.
as much.
It is. It's all related
Yeah.
back to misogyny, right?
Yeah.
In this case, though, like, if you like, and this is all problematic to begin with, because who decided whose chest was okay to be seen, and like, where does that all come from,
Well, it
right?
leads to the whole issue to begin with.
Yes.
Like even with nipples.
Yes, right. But like, more likely, when we think about who's going to take their shirt off in public, it's more likely to be a trans man. How many videos do you see of like trans men who've had top surgery, who are out on the beach, and they are feeling gender euphoria and excitement? So that's where, when we think about the impact of this bill, because we already know about nudity laws and all of that, it's most likely going to be trans men who are going to take their shirt off in public, right? Not always, but most likely. And so the other aspects of this bill, so it expanded the language of who will be impacted, and just know that, like, really it's cis men are the only people who are safe from this.
Right.
There are some like medical conditions that a cis man might have. I think it's called gynecomastia or something, and that just means like enlargement of men's breasts because of, hormones or something.
That is very common.
It is very common.
It is very common.
Right.
Plenty of men
Right.
walking around.
Yeah. And even with like weightlifters.
More
right, because
than I have.
it might be like they're taking some kind of like hormones or drugs or supplements,
steroids.
Right, exactly, that will impact that. So but primarily the only people who are not going to be impacted by this are cis men, of course. And then the other aspect of this is that the language in it, and this was originally the language, they did make one adjustment, is that the measure is offense. So if somebody sees you and is offended, that is all that is required. And also, it is not just public spaces, it is public spaces and anywhere another person is present.
And we're the party of the snowflakes.
I know.
Exactly.
Like,
writing a legislature about being offended.
Yes.
Yeah. That offends me,
Right.
you're getting a ticket.
Well, so the original bill, the original law had offense and annoyance.
Yeah.
And they removed annoyance, which, like, okay, thank you. I don't know. Like, why was it in the law to begin with?
Right.
Like, why is offense a measure? Like, you know what I mean?
It's too subjective.
It's so subjective, and that's the problem. You look at the measure and you look at like the placement, like where it is impacting, and now you look at the expanded definition. This bill is so broad and problematic, and
there still is some like vagueness, right? So maybe Preston and I could state some situations that we think we might have thought or we've heard people talk about,
right?
And you could help us clarify.
Perfect.
Yes, no, maybe.
Yeah.
So how about a drag queen performing at a park who has like the bra, the breastplate.
Uh-huh.
It's covered up, you know, like they're wearing
Yeah.
something, maybe see a little cleavage.
Uh-huh.
Is that okay or not okay?
Well, I mean, like technically, I gotta pull up my language just to
Okay.
make sure I'm 100% correct, because
I throw the hard one out there first. Sorry.
Well, and the thing is like a large part of this is around seeing nipple and areola. Like a lot of the language in there
Okay.
is talking about that. I just want to see and make sure. And if I'm not sure, I'm not going to like guarantee what I'm saying. Just
Okay.
because it is really important to me. So what I have is resembles breasts and genitalia. And so I'd have to go back to the specific bill language. And I would encourage anybody to do that around prosthetics, because everything else is around like you're seeing breast or you're seeing nipple and areola specifically.
Okay.
When it comes to like, and I think that's when it comes to female breasts. I think it stays broad for prosthetics and it stays broad for trans women. And so that's a problem. So it could potentially become a problem.
Because it's like, yeah, it's because then it makes me also think of like a packer.
Yes. Right.
Would that be something?
Potentially.
But
how would you prove it? Right.
Yeah. They're like, oh, well.
Right.
Well, one of the issues was during the hearing, people were really trying to be like, well, how are you going to police this?
Yes.
And they kept saying like, well, this isn't just, you know, we're trying, it's a normal law that we already have. And
so why change it?
Yeah, but you're not understanding that it needs to have like lewd intent. And it's like, okay, well, who's going to police this? The fucking cops are going to be doing that.
And making it lewd intent, I think, does lead to what people are talking about, it being a sex crime eventually.
Exactly.
I know that's not what this is right now.
So I just want to note, though, the bill does not say lewd intent, right? The bill says offense.
Exactly.
The bill talks about offense as being the measure if you are offended. So I want to be clear on that. The measure is offense. Very specifically, it calls out that. When we're talking about the sex offender registry, though, there are requirements around the sex offender registry that it has to have like a sexual intent or be with a child. And it has to go through a court, a judge. This is my understanding, a judge or the courts would decide, right? It is not something that is automatic. And there would have to be proof behind that. Now, I'm sure people are questioning, like, how much can we trust our court systems? Valid point.
Well, an HIV disclosure is also, non-HIV disclosure is also a sex or offender defense as well.
And there's a lot of problems.
Not to derail it.
Yes,
but I feel like it had to be said.
Yes, and so I understand why people are concerned, and I don't think it's like necessarily invalid to say this could lead to, like, you're like thinking like, what could this lead to, and you're taking in context from what's happening, what we're seeing. But what is problematic is saying immediately you are put on the sex offender. That is not what this is doing.
Right.
The other thing that I would just call out too about this particular bill is the enforcement. So the enforcement, this is again where it starts to bring in criminal action. Is that you, if you are charged with indecent exposure, you get a misdemeanor. You get 3. You get a felony on a felony
within 5 years.
Within 5 years. Yep. You have to all the misdemeanors have to happen within 5 years, and a felony you could get up to 5 years in prison. That is not nothing. That is terrifying and
is there
horrific.
any jail time or incarceration before that? So you would get a misdemeanor. What they would write you a ticket?
I don't know enough to know like what would come of a misdemeanor specifically. But the jail time specifically states within the bill,
so it only happens
tied to the felony. Yeah.
So we wouldn't be put into jail even if we.
But you would be dealing with the criminal justice system, and that we know is harmful in and of itself for trans folks.
Definitely.
It's like another example that was used in the hearing was, if there's like a bachelorette party and they have the necklaces with like little penises on them, according to like the language in the bill, like you could be charged for that. But then the language that these Republicans use to try it, they're like, well, no, that's different. It's like, well, how is it different? Well, because you're not doing it to be offensive. It's like, well, sort of, but then the burden of all of this falls on the police to determine what is deemed appropriate, inappropriate, or offensive. And it's like, when it comes to the police, I don't want those to be the people interacting with me that are going to decide, because historically that's not going to fare well for our community.
Right. Totally. And so that's like, and this is what we're seeing a lot of, is these like overly broad subjective bills that become, you know, really hard. How do we enforce these?
Right.
That was the big problem with the facilities bill. And we could talk a little bit about that one as well.
I just wanted to check in about the with indecent exposure, that it can be anywhere in public. So it's like, so you could even be, and clarification, because I've heard people talk about, like, you could be in your backyard as a trans man, say, take off your shirt, you're mowing the lawn or whatever. That could be found offensive, and potentially, you know, somebody could call, whatever.
Right.
That could be a situation. If you're at a bar watching a drag show and something happens, that could be a space where it's not okay. Just out on the street. Like, it's pretty much anywhere, right? It's except anywhere. Maybe the privacy of your home.
It's anywhere where another person is present.
Got you.
Yeah.
And that is, again, how broad this bill is. And so I used the example when I was testifying about mowing the lawn.
I heard it somewhere.
But like, think about, like, that's a pretty, like the chance of me in my backyard and having somebody call the police on me is probably pretty low. Right. Like, I know my neighbors, like, but they also know who I am.
I know a trans woman who had gotten recently, their neighbors called them, and the police came and talked with them because they were wearing a bikini in their front yard.
So, and see, it's not an impossible
and there wasn't
thing.
Like charges or anything at that point, but
because a bikini doesn't count.
But the fact that there was even like
exactly. That's that is the problem with this bill, is that it's going to target people. And because it was passed upon signature, it was clear the intention of this was to have it ready for Pride celebrations. And we know, even from the people who testified, the reality is there's going to be people who are particularly showing up to try to police these spaces themselves. That's really where the harm comes in. Less likely on an individual basis, not impossible.
Right.
But when we start to have like our events where we're there to celebrate and to be ourselves and live our lives and all of that, you know, it's going to increase like citizen policing on that. And that's the goal of these bills.
In the hearing, though, they probably alluded to the fact that, because this was just a trans woman in pasties, just like any other woman could be.
Right.
So was not doing anything wrong.
Right.
But when they testified and they talked about it in the hearings, did they sensationalize it a little bit?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, kind of like when they did that with the drag queen up north.
Absolutely.
Where they,
just like that.
They said it was what it wasn't.
100%.
But because it's in the Statehouse, it doesn't necessarily have to be proven to be true.
Well, and
to be discussed or that sort of thing.
Right. And that's where the lawsuit happened, because they actually, not only did they speak about it like falsely, they were actually like sending out falsified video, right?
Yeah, but even at that, but it wasn't like it was not allowed to be brought up in talking about it in, you know, around making laws or things like that.
And that is why this law came to be, was because of Canyon County Pride, and because people went down there specifically to seek out a fence.
Right.
And so it wasn't just the sponsor of the bill. It was actually one of the people who was basically a sponsor of this bill was from the Nampa City Council. And that is why they pushed for this bill. It is absolutely,
as it was, they didn't want to do it to begin with. They didn't want to have the event to begin with. Like the mayor made that.
Yes. It was very clear this was targeted. So absolutely.
And they were blatantly lying about it. Like, it was very convenient that the photo that they were referencing was taken from behind. You couldn't see that this woman was wearing pasties, and they had other like bad actors that were there trying to find something to complain about, and they were like, oh no, I was there, I saw it. I saw it with my own eyes. She was topless. And it's like, that's not fucking true. It's not pasties. True.
Well, and it's also like, if even according to like Nampa City like law, pasties are like okay.
Yeah,
including to this law.
I don't know why I touched myself when I said that, but
right.
There was nothing showing.
Right. And so like there was no violation of the law. And so that just goes to show what they're seeking to do here.
Right.
And it is specifically, even though they say this is not about one community, it is very clearly always about our community.
What advice would you have for, I think, like, of the people who are going to be going out to these pride events, but also like as people, like, we're putting on the trans march and we've talked a lot about like, how do we responsibly create space for trans and non-binary people right now, given this law?
Right.
What would you suggest or encourage people who are putting together these prides, what would you suggest they think about or consider?
I'd honestly, like, there's like a few things. I think this is a really difficult position to be in because I think that there's going to be, there's talk about there policies put in place as a way of protecting community to have t-shirt policies. Certainly there are going to be people who are going to say, absolutely not, I will not comply with this law. Right. And so there's like tension and difficulty in that way. And then, so it's like, do we police ourselves? And is it policing or is it trying to help keep communities safe? Like, there's a lot of questions that come up.
And if you're creating a space for like a large population of folks, you can tell everyone to wear a t-shirt, but people aren't going to do that. They're going to get in, they're going to, like, somebody's going to do it and they're not going to think it through in the ways that I think we need to. Like, they're not going to have a plan for if the police arrest them or if they get a ticket or things like that. Whereas I think we have a
So it's the organizers. The organizers absolutely have to take on part of that role. And I know, like, talking to folks with the Canyon County Pride, I know like Boise Pride, organizers of these events. I'm sure you all are thinking about it. You like are taking steps to we're recognizing this is the reality. What steps do we have to take as organizers to keep our community as safe as possible, whether they abide by like guidelines or don't abide by guidelines? And that is the work that as organizers and leaders we have to do.
Yeah, totally.
It is that's the responsibility, right? Because people are going to do what they believe is best.
Because there's going to be plenty of people that think like, okay, I'll get a misdemeanor.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's okay. And I want people to feel like they, I would never want to get in the way of somebody's
individual
to do
right
that,
to do
right?
It. Yep.
And I also don't want to set anyone else to be. So it's just such a hard
one
line that I don't even really think I know what the answer is yet.
Yeah, and that's where I'd be like, I'd probably talk to some legal organizations too, and maybe get some insight from them and like how they might be able to support this, because like, some people are gonna be like, fuck the system, I'm gonna do this. And also there's the aspect of like, is doing that inviting police into an environment? Is that something that person should even have to consider and still have bodily? That's where it gets complicated and difficult. And
the other option, we could just create spaces that are private and we don't let anyone else in and like things like that. But then that to me is like letting them win in a lot of ways.
So that's where it's difficult.
Or like it's harmful to us as a community to feel like that we have to exist in our fullness behind closed doors.
Right.
And that's the way that shame manifests. Is that, we're hiding in the dark or that's just not a healthy place for anyone to exist in.
Yeah. And it's just not a place that we should have to exist in. And the other question I've had a lot of people ask about this particular bill is like, should they go out? And this has been primarily like trans men have asked this question. Should they go out and be topless? Like go to hot springs or go to the lake or like, and like asking like, what is the likelihood? Yeah, swimming. And it's a hard one, and it's all about like what is your personal like feelings on this? Like what is your like what is a safe, like what are some of the safety things that you're taking into consideration? What is the support you have? And ultimately it's really an individual choice, but that's why it's so important that people understand the true real impacts of this bill and not a sensationalized version of it as well.
Yeah, there was one question I had because I kind of felt like the idea that they said like 3 in 5 years would be a felony.
Mhm.
I'm curious because oftentimes my understanding when people are prosecuted for crimes, there's usually multiple crimes. It's not usually just one thing.
Right.
It's usually like a lot of other things that's kind of topped onto that.
Right.
Is there potential for one incident to have multiple charges?
Right.
As in, like, is the offense one person? If there's 3 different offenses, is that 3 different charges?
Right.
You know, because to me, I feel like there's the potential of stacking it up to where technically the first time you did anything, it's
Right.
a felony in 5 years. Obviously, there would have to be more charges brought up, but I'm just not sure it's clear to me on if that's a possibility or it's really just you can only have one charge per offense.
Right. So maybe what we can do, because I don't know, that's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that one, so I don't want to guess. So maybe what we could do is, like, there's been a couple of good questions around, like, from a prosthetic standpoint, and then also from this standpoint.
And I know that ACLU has some.
They put out some, and they're working on, I think they've got a document that they're going to be putting out, but maybe, like, let's look at that documentation. I can ask that question, and maybe the next time you all do the podcast, you could just be like, here's an update on the last podcast, and you can share that information out too.
Definitely. And I'm wondering, I just feel like this is a really important bill. It's happening right now.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure that we're putting enough time and energy toward it to get the clarity. Because that's something that I feel like we've been challenged by, and something I feel really good about this conversation today is that I think it brings a lot of clarity. Where clarity can be done, right?
Yes.
Even clarity just in the I don't know-ness or the maybes is still more clarity than what's happening. So I would much rather spend a little bit more time sussing this out if we need to, and then we could do another conversation with around facilities. And either we do that with you, or we also might be able to bring in like either Jenna again. Or
there's so many good people.
I know Cole Lefevre was wanting to be on the podcast at some point in time in the future. So, and I know that there's some activities that might be happening around that, because I feel like in some ways that might be a more, when we were talking about taking a stand, the facilities bill might be more of a place for us to take a stand. More safely, if you will, or more calculated versus like the indecent exposure kind of situation. Because they're like, and that's always the thing that you have to look at. And again, this is what makes the indecent exposure bill. And I do think it's, you make a good point of like really being like clear on it, is that it comes with criminal charges. Whereas many of these other bills, both Pride Flag bills, the school one and also the government one, have nothing. There is no enforcement mechanism, right? But and then like the facilities bill, even there, there's like the updated version of the Don't Say Gay bill in schools. Those have private cause of actions, so it's not directly targeting individual. There's some differences between some of those bills, but it's not directly like introducing charges against a person, whereas this one does, right? And the other thing I just say around any legislation is sometimes we don't know fully the impact yet. That was how the sex and gender bill was. We were calling it a stepping stone bill. On the face of it, we knew that it updated Idaho code to essentially strip our identity out of it, and intersex folks' identity out of it as well. And so we didn't know fully how that might come to play. We had ideas. Now this session, we're really starting to see how they're applying that bill, and it comes to play in the indecent exposure bill, because as a trans man, I'm seen as a woman in the state of Idaho. So when it says female breasts, that's how they're going to apply that to me, right? And so just to say, we don't always know the complete impact right out the gate, which I think even in that in and of itself brings clarity to the situation, because I think I've had perception at time that like law is pretty cut and dry. Don't do this. If you do this, then this happens. But it's not really clear.
That's how it should be.
What it is.
Right now, it's like especially ambiguous.
It's not as cut as dry as like I murder somebody, I steal some shit.
Right.
Like, that's pretty clear, right?
Right.
They might have to prove that you actually did it, but
Right.
it's like, you know, a thing. This is like, you don't
Yes.
even necessarily know what you
Right.
did was wrong.
And
or
I feel
not,
like
or-
that's a deliberate strategy
Yes.
because the vibe I get from it, and we've talked about this a lot, is like when you put frogs in water and you slowly heat it up and they don't jump out because it's
Mhm.
fine, but then finally it's boiling and it's too late.
Mhm.
And I feel like with this ambiguity, they're kind of testing like what they can get away with,
Mhm.
who's going to follow procedure and all of these. And then
Mhm.
I feel like next session,
Mhm.
it's going to be maybe instead of like, you know, suing the entity for
Mhm.
the facilities, you could potentially sue the person.
Mhm.
And I feel like there are these just stepping stones that we're going through, just pushing a little bit
Yeah.
further each time.
Well, and so when we say there's 25 bills
Mhm.
or pieces of legislation introduced this session, several of them were of the same topic. So I think both the indecent exposure bill and also the facilities bill
Mhm.
had multiple versions of them before we
Mhm.
got to the ones that were
Mhm.
passed.
Gotcha.
And sometimes it can be kind of insightful to go back and see, okay, well, this was the first version of the bill. What did it say in this bill and what
Mhm.
changed in it? And kind of like, it's a little bit of like follow the breadcrumbs, right?
Right.
And the first facilities bill was more broad
Mhm.
in where it applied. The final, there was some reason where they're like, we're not going to be able to get this one passed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that they adjusted it to try to make it something they could get passed.
Right.
Mhm.
And so that's where we started to see that it only applies to very specific colleges, universities, correctional facilities, and some domestic violence shelters, right? So it's very specific. Same thing happened with the indecent exposure bill, and I can't remember the original one. So sometimes that's a little bit of a helpful insight.
Yeah.
100% do I believe that they're going to bring some of this back?
Mhm.
For sure. I don't know if it'll be the indecent exposure bill specifically.
I think the facilities one,
Yeah, for sure.
expand that one.
Yeah. I'm curious, and this is like I don't think it's a derailment, but I'm
Yeah.
curious, like from an activist standpoint, I think there are plenty of activists, or the activist even in me, who
Mhm.
maybe wants to do something about this. A random thought was, I know people talked about how the truck nuts,
Yeah.
like that being a
Mhm.
thing. So for a moment, it feels like, oh, then a possible challenge would be to find people with truck nuts, call the police,
Mhm.
get them misdemeanors, kind of block up the system,
Right.
show how ridiculous it
Right.
is. But if I think about that same sort of concept with, now there's like a heterosexual awesomeness or whatever pride
Right.
that's happening, right?
Yeah.
And a part of me feels like, who cares?
Right.
Like, we don't need to protest it. We
Yeah.
don't need to do anything. Like, do your thing, because we want to do our thing too.
Yeah.
And so part of me feels like, or I wonder if, like, say, going after people with truck nuts
Mhm.
is kind of like saying that truck nuts is not something that, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's offensive and wrong, which I think doesn't really lend to
Right.
our cause. Because
So
at the end of the day, it's
yeah,
all ridiculous.
it is all ridiculous. And also it'll still be up to the police whether or not they
Yeah.
decide to do anything
And they're gonna be like,
about
that's
it.
fine. I got
Yeah.
some of those on my truck at home.
I know,
Well, and
the
I-
cop has
yeah.
it on there.
Yeah, right. And so, like, I know why the truck nuts argument was made, to like try to show ridiculousness of this
Mhm.
bill. It was not my favorite argument, because
Yeah.
what it does do is it actually like downplays. I think it kind of makes a joke of something that is really severe
Yeah, I agree.
and horrific for a particular group of people.
Mhm.
And like, there's this like kind of thing where you're like, okay, how can we get clever and creative with these arguments to show ridiculousness?
Mhm.
Sometimes it's just saying what is wrong,
Yeah.
and saying who this is going to impact. And I think that is also really important. And to your note, like about the frog, I think the other thing, and that this is what we're seeing a lot of with bills like this, especially ones that are ambiguous or broad,
Mhm.
is that it creates fear.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so what this does is it makes us now, I know in my mind, I'm not a person who walks around with my shirt off a lot
Mhm.
personally, but I would go sit in my backyard and read a book with my shirt
Mhm.
off. And is that going to make me pause? Yeah,
Mm.
100%.
Mhm.
So like now all of a sudden these additional like moments of decision making that we
Yeah.
didn't have to
Yeah.
have have to come into play. And that is, I mean, I may never get a misdemeanor, but forever that I live in this state, I'll be thinking about it.
Yeah, when it's a constant reminder
Right.
of our transness. I think we often talk about wanting to be able to exist beyond our transness. And I think that's a way for us to be constantly reminded that we are different, or that we are perceived in this way. I mean, a lot of us just want to live our damn lives just like anybody else.
Right. Absolutely.
There's we all have these like lines in the sand for when we're like, okay, well, maybe it's time to leave, right?
Yeah.
2 of the 3 of mine have already come and gone. But the last one, and I feel like this kind of pertains to this conversation, is we have to wear identifiers. And that made me really nervous in the hearing for 264 with the facilities bill, because how are they going to police this? How could they possibly know? And we've already seen across the country instances where they've been wrong about like the gender, the sex of people. So
very common.
It seems to me that it would be so much easier for them if they could just look and be like, oh, well, they clearly go here. And that scares the shit out of me. And I don't know.
Oh, it's like the pink triangle.
Exactly.
Right. And like, I'm not taking away that is not a possibility, because it's happened, right? There is historical precedence of something like this happening. Where I see this probably coming into play more immediately, this is a guess again, is in our documentation, right? It is in either potentially reversing our documentation if you've had it updated. It's in the issues that we're having with passports. One of the bills that was introduced in this session that didn't make it through, and I think mostly because it ran out of time, it wasn't like it was defeated, was a bill about birth certificates and adding like coding on it if you've changed your changed information, specifically like your gender marker on it. And so like when I think about how do they start to track us, one, we already know nationally they've like walked back protections for LGBTQ folks around surveillance. And then also we're just seeing like this kind of attack on our documentation. So I would say on that front, have your documentation, make copies of your documentation, keep it locked away and safe, and where you are able to access it. I know not everybody has been able to update it either, and I would look into, I don't know all there's like difficulties around being able to update different types of documents right now because of what is happening federally, and even some of the things locally with the sex and gender. And so I would maybe reach out to like orgs like ACLU Idaho if you have questions about whether or not you should be updating documents right now, if it is safe, before you're making those decisions. But, making sure you have access to that stuff, like your birth certificates, your passports, your social security cards, especially if you've updated those things. Because that's where I probably see these identifiers coming first. I could be wrong.
Great point.
Right.
I mean, because that is already happening.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that. I thought I was like one of the last people to get my gender marker changed, because it was like I got it maybe 2 weeks before they started doing all that. They didn't change mine. Like I filled out the paperwork for it and they still didn't.
For your passport?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Really?
Yeah, I got it and I was like, but now I'm kind of like, maybe that's good.
Yeah, I go back and forth around that too. Because even when you're talking about keeping these documents, like in some ways I feel like it could be proof that it's not
right.
At least unless you have all the right stuff, right?
Well, and that's where like some of these questions come into play, is like how are like, and I what I don't want to do again is like theorize on things that make people believe a certain thing is about to happen. Right. But having said that, I think having conversations of like, what are we going to do if something like this happens is also important. So the conversation we're having is a what if. It is not like this is like we know this is going to happen. Right. Kind of thing. And I do think what if questions and conversations are important because it's part of our safety planning that we need to be taking into consideration.
And it's just empowering.
Absolutely.
It helps to feel like I think it also helps with like gaslighting or something,
Yeah.
because I think you can feel certain things,
Right.
but if you can't talk about it and work through it, then it makes you feel like you're just being
100%.
extra.
Well, and like these people are like, that's never going to happen. Like you're talking about the peak
Yeah.
triangle. That's never going to happen. Well, it happened.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So like anybody who thinks
Well, and
that
they're
like,
deporting people.
right.
Like
Yeah, they're
putting
sending
them in
them to camps.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Right. This is happening. It's not even just it happened. This is happening.
currently happening.
And so, like, if anybody looking at you outside of the community, anybody who's like looking at, especially at trans folks and non-binary folks, and saying you're overreacting, I think it's time to pay more attention and to listen.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you know, going all the way back, it's so important we have the most accurate information that we can. And one is just so that, you know, maybe we're not feeling such extreme fear, but the reality is we're going to feel fear.
Right.
Yeah.
More, it's about so we can make really informed decisions.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when I think about moving,
Mhm.
I think if you need to move. It's okay to leave. I think there's like pressure to stay and fight. But for the people most impacted, and I've had conversations, I think all three of us have had this conversation of like, we feel like we need to stay and fight.
Yeah.
And also,
And there's moments of that feeling foolish.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's okay to make decisions because it isn't just about being safe. It's also about being able to find happiness and joy and living authentically.
And I think part of that for me is legacy.
Yeah,
You know, like
absolutely.
thinking about what life will look like for the people after me.
Right.
And will me running away, will me not, whatever, be an asset or a deficit to the people who come past me. And I think as I've gotten older, I think that's also one of the reasons why I moved back, was really just thinking about that idea of when I'm gone, you know, what did I do? What did I do now so that the people behind me can have a little bit of a better experience than I had? Because because people did that for me too, right?
Yeah. And those are the same things I think about is like, we also know like there's a lot of people who moving is not an option.
Yeah.
The expensive move, like there's our community experiences things when we talk about like housing instability, income instability, health, all of these things that make making decisions like that sometimes impossible. And it is hard to think about. I just think like there's fighting, and then it's also okay to take care of yourself. And whether that's leaving or whether that's stepping back or whatever that is.
It's so hard to like, because at this point for me, it's like I don't want to move to like a blue state. I would want to leave the country, and that's like so hard. I thought I had an out, right? Because I have a cousin who lives in Canada. He ended up being a total fucking phobe. So I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, I feel the same way.
Well,
like, I want to stay
some
and
of
fight.
those places are not. How much longer are they going to be safe? Because
exactly.
Canada's starting to have issues. The UK.
But the recent election was a good thing in Canada, at the very least. Yeah. But yes, 100%. What is safe? What does safety mean? Too, in this world that is changing drastically around us, for sure.
Well, awesome. I appreciate that you came here with us again today.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Me too.
I'm sure we'll have you on again.
Yes.
Was there anything else you wanted to talk about or bring up today, or final statement?
Yeah, I mean, I just think like going back to like if there are things that you the other thing is just like a feeling of powerlessness, like when we're starting to see this, or like what do I do then when, you know, when it feels like too scary to do certain other things. And I think one, which is what you all like focus on so much, is like find your community and be with your community and like build space for it. Like, and there's so many organizations and like things that exist. Go do game night at the community center or attend, you know, a transjoy event, or like there's just like
trans collective
or you know, like
really great stuff.
Exactly. So there's like neuroqueer collective art shows. I think about, you know, like there's or art days, you know. I just think that there's, find your community, find that space. I do think like get your documentation, just like know where it's at, feel confident, comfortable knowing that you've got it in a place, you know where to access it quickly. And then just it's okay to mourn and
Mhm.
feel grief and be angry and be sad and to be considering leaving. And it's like okay to feel all those things too.
Mhm.
I started following this account. I think it's called Queer Grief. I can't remember the name of it.
Mhm.
But it's talking about grief. And I think also we don't do a lot of that because
Yeah.
we're like, we are finding joy. We got to like find spaces of
Mhm.
joy.
Yeah.
And then also like experiencing grief about what is happening is
It can be
absolutely,
overwhelming, too.
yeah, absolutely a
Yeah.
valid thing to do.
Yeah.
So, just take care of each other, take care of ourselves. And that's what we got to do.
Yeah. And for folks who aren't in the Boise area or even in Idaho, yes, we're talking specifically about what's happening with us here, but this is happening all over. So this
Yes.
might be happening in your neighborhood, in your state, or neighboring ones. So we'd encourage you to get connected with your community where you're at, learn these sorts of things. If these conversations aren't being had, start having them.
Mhm.
We're just normal people that are just trying to do what we can to show up for our community. And we can't rely on people in some other state or some other country or some other place. We really have to find ways to empower ourselves and one another because we all need it. Like everyone is tapped out wherever they're at. So helping out somebody far away is just going to become less and less practical or possible. And they're not the best ones for it. We know best what's going on in our communities and what we're missing or not missing. And we just have to work to find ways to stay connected and continue to exist and as full of expression as we can.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree.
All right, should we say goodbye?
Yeah, I feel like that helped a lot with a lot of the misinformation and disinformation that's out there.
And we'll talk about the facilities and all that more in upcoming episodes.
Absolutely.
For sure.
And always reach out. Reach out if you have questions. And also,
Yeah, in the show notes and stuff, we'll have Nikson's contact information. We'll also have some links to the ACLU's information and their recommendations, as well as Nikson's. So check out the show notes. And regardless of when you're coming across it, we'll do what we can to not only update it, because this information is always changing, and our understanding is always changing.
Yes.
So,
Sounds good.
All right.
See you next week.